The sun blessed the city of Oakhaven, casting its golden rays upon the spires and cobblestone streets, a testament to its enduring prosperity. For generations, this was a city of life, a heart that pulsed with the rhythm of commerce and community. In the bustling central market, Ilara, her hands deftly arranging vibrant silks and exotic spices at her family's stall, shared a smile that mirrored the morning's brilliance. Her laughter, a familiar melody in the market symphony, reached her husband, Kyle, as he made his rounds. Clad in the leather and steel of the city guard, his presence was one of quiet strength, a guardian of the peace he cherished. He paused, his gaze softening as he watched Ilara and their daughter, Lyra, whose bright eyes and braided hair were a miniature reflection of her mother's warmth. He knelt, sharing a whispered joke with Lyra, and for a fleeting moment, their small family was the center of this perfect, sun-drenched world. The air was filled with the sounds of artisans hammering, children's gleeful shouts, and the gentle murmur of a city at ease with itself, secure within its formidable walls. But peace, like a fragile glass, is easily shattered. A change began not with a crash, but with a whisper carried on the wind. It started with a lone messenger, his horse lathered and his face a mask of panic as he burst through the main gate, collapsing before the city council. His frantic words spoke of shadows in the east, of fire, and of a horde that consumed all in its path. Soon, the whispers turned into a tide of fear as the first refugees arrived, their carts laden with what little they could salvage, their eyes wide with the horrors they had fled. They spoke of an army vast and merciless, a moving darkness that left only silence in its wake. In the market, the cheerful bartering faded, replaced by hushed, anxious conversations. Ilara, packing away her unsold wares, felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. The stories were too many. The fear in the stranger's eyes too real. She looked towards the city walls, the familiar stone now seeming less like a symbol of security and more like the last bastion against a gathering storm. The storm broke with the discordant clang of the city's great alarm bells, a sound that sliced through the afternoon haze and sent a jolt of pure terror through every citizen. The vibrant tapestry of daily life was torn asunder. People scrambled through the streets, their faces etched with fear, abandoning stalls and workshops to seek the sanctuary of their homes. Heavy groans of wood and iron echoed through Oakhaven as the massive city gates were barred, sealing them in, or perhaps sealing the danger out. From the barracks, Kale and the rest of the city guard emerged, their expressions grim and determined. They rushed towards the battlements, their leather armor creaking, their hands gripping the hilts of their swords. They were the city's shield, the thin line of defense against the coming night. In her home, just a street away from the market, Ilara pulled Lyra into a tight embrace, whispering words of comfort she herself did not believe. Lyra trembled against her, the terrifying sound of the bells a promise of the nightmare to come. From his vantage point on the city wall, Kale stared eastward, his breath catching in his throat. The whispers had not done it justice. The horizon was no longer a line separating earth and sky. It was a living, breathing entity of darkness. An army, impossibly vast, stretched from one edge of the world to the other, a tide of black steel and malevolent intent rolling inexorably towards them. The sheer scale of the enemy force was a physical blow, a weight that crushed the hope from the air. As the siege horns began their mournful, guttural cry, the camera pulls back, showing the lone, proud city dwarfed by the encroaching shadow. In the window of her home, Ilara saw the darkening sky and the first flicker of distant war fires. Her face, once alight with the joy of a peaceful life, was now a portrait of absolute terror, her eyes reflecting the dawn of her city's final desperate battle.
The city held its breath under a blanket of stars, a silence stretched thin over the cold stone and narrow streets. Distant rhythmic thuds echoed from the darkness beyond the walls, the sound of the enemy's catapults finding their range, a promise of the violence to come. Inside a small torchlit room, Ilara hummed a soft, wavering tune, trying to soothe her younger sister Lyra, whose eyes were wide with a fear that sleep could not conquer. The lullaby was a fragile shield against the encroaching dread, a whispered prayer in the face of an encroaching storm. On the ramparts, the wind cut like a blade. Kyle stood his watch, his knuckles white where he gripped the cold parapet. Below him, a sea of enemy campfires glittered, 1,000 malevolent stars that had settled upon their land. Each fire represented a dozen men, 100, all waiting for the dawn to tear their world apart. He scanned the horizon, his jaw tight, the faces of his family, of Ilara, etched into his mind. This wall was more than just stone. It was the last bastion between his world and oblivion, and he was a part of it. The weight of that duty settled upon him, heavier than any armor he could ever wear. As the first sliver of dawn bled across the sky, the silence was shattered. The deep, guttural bellow of war horns ripped through the air, a sound that vibrated in the very marrow of their bones. The enemy was coming. From his vantage point, Kyle watched in horror as the dark mass of the opposing army surged forward. Giant siege towers, like monstrous wooden beasts, groaned as they were pushed toward the walls, their shadows falling over the defenders like a death shroud. Battering rams, capped with iron skulls, began their percussive assault on the main gate, each impact a tremor that shook the city. The world dissolved into chaos. War had arrived not as a distant threat, but as a maelstrom of steel and screams. Arrows fell like a black rain, thudding into wooden shields and finding flesh with sickening finality. Kale fought with a desperate fury, his sword a blur of motion, parrying, thrusting, and cutting down the first wave of soldiers who reached the walls on crude ladders. Near the gatehouse, Commander Garrick's voice was a raw, commanding roar, shouting orders that were nearly lost in the din of battle. The clash of siege engines against the fortress walls was a grinding, deafening symphony of destruction, a brutal contest between wood, iron, and stone. Hours later, the assault faltered. The enemy fell back, leaving their broken siege engines and a field littered with the dead and dying. A fragile quiet descended upon the walls, a silence filled not with peace but with the grim toll of their survival. The air was thick with the smell of blood, smoke, and sweat. Wounded soldiers, their faces pale and etched with pain, were carefully helped through the streets, which were now stained with the evidence of the morning's fight. The city had held, but the cost was etched into every face, every broken shield, every silent, grieving figure. Kyle, his body a canvas of exhaustion and blood spatter, staggered through the chaos until he found Ilara. She was in a makeshift aid station set up in the market square, her hands stained red as she tended to the wounded, her expression a mask of strained composure. Their eyes met across the courtyard, and in that single glance, an entire conversation passed between them, of fear, of relief, of the unspoken terror of what was yet to come. He closed the distance and pulled her into a brief, fierce embrace, a silent acknowledgement that they had survived this day, together. The immediate danger had passed, but the true trial was just beginning. In the city square, a herald announced the new reality, strict rationing of food and water. The city's gates were sealed, their supply lines severed. Later, in the quiet of her home, Ilara stared at her family's dwindling provisions. A few sacks of grain, a cask of water, a handful of dried herbs. It was not enough, it would never be enough. The siege was no longer a battle fought on the walls. It was a slow, creeping starvation that would soon grip them all. From high above, the shot pulled back, revealing the grand city of Viridia in its entirety. No longer a home, but a cage, completely encircled by the relentless, patient enemy army, a tightening noose around its neck. The 43rd day of the siege dawned gray and silent, the air thick with the dust of crumbled hope. Weeks had bled into a monotonous cycle of despair, the gnawing hunger a constant, unwelcome companion in the hollowed-out city of Ethel. Once bustling market squares were now desolate stages for the quiet drama of starvation, where long, shuffling queues of gaunt figures waited for a spoonful of watery gruel or a sliver of moldy turnip. The city was a ghost of its former self, its boisterous lifeblood drained away, leaving only the rasping breath of its dying people. In a small, cold room overlooking the silent streets, Ilara performed the daily ritual of sacrifice. She broke the last piece of stale bread, its crust hard as stone, and gave the larger portion to her daughter, Lyra. The child, all of 6 years old, was a fragile shadow, her eyes too large for her gaunt face. Lyra took the bread with listless fingers, her energy long since consumed by the relentless famine. Across the room, Kyle, his jaw tight and his face etched with grim determination, chewed on a piece of boiled leather, a desperate, pathetic attempt to trick his stomach into feeling full. There were no more songs, no laughter, only the oppressive quiet of a city slowly being starved into submission. As if the hunger were not a cruel enough master, a new terror began to stalk the cobblestone alleys, a sickness the people called the Red Plague. It started with a fever that burned like an internal fire, followed by a racking cough that stained lips and handkerchiefs with crimson. The infirmaries, already overflowing with the malnourished and the weak, became charnel houses. Men in leather aprons, their faces grim masks of exhaustion, carried the afflicted away on crude stretchers, their destination a mass grave beyond the old city walls. Soon the plague found its way into Ilara's small room. Lyra's listless quiet turned into a feverish heat, her small body shaken by violent coughing fits that left her breathless and pale. Desperate, Ilara carried her daughter through the city, a phantom navigating a landscape of misery, to the last remaining healer. The old man's surgery was a scene of utter chaos and hopelessness. His shelves were bare, his remedies exhausted. He looked at Lyra with eyes full of pity but offered no cure. "There is nothing," he rasped, his voice raw. "No herbs, no elixirs, only prayer is left to us now." Ilara clutched her daughter, a cold dread seeping into her heart, more chilling than the winter wind whistling through the shattered rooftops. Hope, once a flickering candle, was now all but extinguished. That night, under a sliver of a moon, a desperate gamble took shape in the flickering torchlight of the barracks. Cale and Garrick, a grizzled captain whose face was a roadmap of past battles, huddled over a worn map of the city's defenses. They would not wait for the plague and hunger to claim everyone. Their plan was audacious, bordering on suicidal. A small hand-picked group would slip out through a forgotten postern gate, a relic of a bygone era, and attempt to raid the enemy's supply lines for medicine. It was a fool's errand, a moth drawn to a flame, but it was better than the slow, agonizing death of waiting. In the deepest hour of the night, cloaked in shadow, Cale and 5 others, their movements as silent as ghosts, disappeared through the ancient gate and into the darkness of no man's land. From a high, narrow window in the citadel, Ilara watched, her arms wrapped tightly around Lyra's shivering body. The fever had worsened, and the child's breaths were shallow, rattling things. Ilara's gaze was fixed on the inky blackness beyond the walls, the space where Kyle had vanished. Her heart pounded a frantic rhythm against her ribs, a drumbeat of fear and fragile hope. Suddenly, a blaze of light erupted in the enemy camp far below, a signal fire that cast the fleeing figures of Kale's party into stark, horrifying relief. Shouts echoed across the silent expanse, followed by the sharp, unmistakable clash of steel on steel. The sounds of battle were brief, brutal, and then, just as suddenly as they began, they ceased. An absolute deafening silence fell over the night, a silence that screamed of failure and death. The fire crackled on, its light dancing on the tears that now streamed down Ilara's horrified face. The world held its breath in the gray light of dawn, waiting. Garrick stumbled through the shattered gates, a ghost returning to a city of ghosts. His armor was rent, his face a mask of dried blood and exhaustion. He found Ilara by the well, her small daughter Lyra cradled in her arms, feverish and still. He didn't need to speak the words. The failure of their desperate sortie was etched into every line of his face. Kyle was gone, lost to the horde. But Ilara did not weep. Her grief was a void, a chilling, silent emptiness that was far more terrifying than tears. She simply held Lyra closer, her gaze fixed on the horizon as the last embers of hope died in the city's collective heart. A heavy stillness fell over the streets, the silence of a people resigned to their end, a quiet more profound than any battle cry. The spirit of the city was broken, not with a bang, but with a whisper of despair that a cold wind carried through the desolate streets. The silence was a prelude to thunder. With a guttural roar that seemed to split the very heavens, the enemy began their final assault. Their war horns blotted out the rising sun, a promise of the darkness to come. Enormous siege engines, monstrosities of iron and twisted wood, hurled boulders against the already weakened walls. Stone that had stood for 1,000 years crumbled like sand, each impact a death knell for the city. Inside, there was no organized defense, only pockets of futile, desperate resistance. It wasn't a battle, it was a slaughter. Men and women who had been neighbors and merchants now stood as soldiers for a few fleeting, bloody moments before being overwhelmed. On a crumbling battlement, Garrick made his final stand. He fought not for victory, but for a memory of what once was, his sword a lonely arc of defiance against a tide of steel, until he too was consumed by the wave. The main gate, the city's last bastion, splintered under the relentless assault of a battering ram. The ancient wood groaned its final protest, before bursting inward in a shower of deadly shrapnel. A torrent of enemy soldiers, a river of black iron and snarling faces, flooded the main thoroughfare. They moved with brutal efficiency, cutting down the few remaining guards and the civilians who had dared to hope for a miracle. The sounds of screams and clashing steel echoed through the once peaceful avenues, a symphony of destruction. Huddled in the skeletal ruins of what was once her home, Ilara pulled Lyra tight against her chest, trying to muffle the child's whimpers. She pressed her back against the cold stone, every crash and shout from the street outside a hammer blow against her heart, the sound of the invasion drawing inexorably, terrifyingly closer. Through the smoke and chaos, the enemy commander rode in, his black steed stepping delicately over the bodies of the fallen. He surveyed the devastation not with remorse, but with the quiet satisfaction of a craftsman admiring his work. The city was his. His soldiers, fanning out through the ruins, were methodical in their search. A sharp cry from one of them signaled a discovery. Heavy footsteps crunched on the rubble outside Ilara's hiding spot. As they closed in, her hand tightened around a shard of broken pottery, its edge sharp against her palm. Her fear was eclipsed by a fierce, primal resolve. The final shot is a close-up on Ilara's face, a portrait of defiance and desperation. Her eyes, burning with a mother's unyielding love, are fixed on the invaders as the shadow of a soldier falls over her and Lyra. A cloak of darkness promising an unknown, but certain, end. The city of Ethel, once a jewel of the plains, was now a tapestry of ash and sorrow. Smoke coiled like vengeful spirits from the skeletal remains of homes and libraries, painting the sky in grim shades of gray. Through this desolation, Ilara stumbled, her arms a desperate cradle for her daughter, Lyra. The child's breath was a shallow, fragile thing against her mother's chest. Her eyes barely open, reflecting the ruin around them. They were herded like cattle, the last remnants of a proud people, their steps shuffling through the dust of their ancestors. Ilara's gaze swept over the faces of the other survivors. A gallery of hollowed-out despair, of broken spirits and shattered dreams. Above them, atop the central keep where their own golden banner had once flown, a new flag was unfurled. It was a brutal crimson, a stark symbol of their utter and absolute defeat, a stain against the mournful sky. The enemy had not just conquered their land, they had conquered their hope. A figure on a massive warhorse separated from the invading force, his armor gleaming like polished obsidian. This was the enemy commander, the architect of their downfall. He surveyed the captive crowd with an air of dismissive ownership, his voice a cold, sharp blade that cut through the silence. "This place you called Ethel is no more," he declared, his words echoing through the ravaged square. "Its name will be struck from all maps, its history erased from all records. You are no longer the people of Ethel. You are subjects of the Vraxian Empire. You will serve. You will forget. Your past is dead." A wave of collective anguish rippled through the survivors, a low moan of a people facing not just subjugation, but complete annihilation of their identity. The camera drifts across the sea of faces, capturing the crushing weight of his decree. Hope, it seemed, was the final casualty of this war. But Ilara was not listening to the commander's proclamation of erasure. Her world had narrowed to the small, warm weight in her arms. She pulled Lyra closer, shielding her daughter's face from the grim reality, creating a final, sacred space just for them. Ignoring the tyrant on his horse, she leaned in, her lips brushing against Lyra's ear. Her voice was a soft, urgent whisper, a secret stream flowing against the current of despair. "Listen, my little bird," she murmured. "Let me tell you of our home. It was a city of gold, where the sun loved to linger on the spires." She spoke of their lineage, of grandmothers who could sing the stars from the sky, and grandfathers who built bridges to the clouds. She told Lyra of her father, Kyle, of his laugh that sounded like thunder, and his courage that burned brighter than any fire. In her daughter's fading moments, Ilara was not mourning a lost city. She was building an eternal one within Lyra's memory, weaving a legacy of love and light that no conqueror could ever touch. The commander from his high perch noticed the woman whispering to her child. He saw her face, not etched with the fear and despair of the others, but with a serene, profound love. He scoffed, dismissing her as a woman driven mad by grief, a broken mind clinging to phantoms. Turning his horse, he rode on, confident in his victory, oblivious to the act of rebellion unfolding beneath his gaze. He could not comprehend that true power lay not in swords and flags, but in the stories we carry. The final shot is a slow, intimate zoom into Ilara's eyes. Reflected within them is not defeat, but the entire vibrant history of her lost home. The golden spires, the songs of her ancestors, the bravery of her husband. Her spirit remained an unbroken thread. As the screen fades to black, a single line of text appears. Some stories must never be forgotten. Subscribe to Legacy Thread to uncover more.